I'm Taylor Riggs in for Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Wework layoffs are set to begin this week in the U.S. What this means for the future of the company amid a tumultuous year. Plus, ticking down, U.S. lawmakers are looking to make life harder for the Chinese owners of the video app TikTok. We'll have details on a new national security bill. And trucks before taxis. Will Waymo's driverless fleet give truckers a lot more time at rest stops? We'll ask their chief product officer. But first, to our top story. Wework says job cuts will begin this week. The struggling office sharing startup told staff in an email that cuts will improve efficiency and accountability. Bloomberg has learned that about 2,000 jobs will be eliminated. That's some 16% of Wework's global workforce. Bloomberg Technology's Ellen Hewitt joins us for more. What do we know about these layoffs and where it fits in really to their broader strategy of sort of slimming down, if you will?
Yeah, it's an effort that's been going on in small bits and pieces here and there, but it sounds like based on this new memo that Executive Chairman Marcelo Claure sent out to staff this morning, it's going to start, quote, in earnest in the U.S. this week. So they had already been starting to have maybe some layoffs overseas, and then there had been some cuts in side businesses such as Meetup and other side businesses that Wework owns. But this seems like maybe this week is going to be the big time. So they had actually originally scheduled an all-hands meeting for Tuesday, and another part of the memo says that actually that meeting is going to be moved to Friday in order to, I think, give time for all the job cuts to sort of percolate through the company this week. And then on Friday, they expect Marcelo to give an update on the 5-year plan of the company.
Do we have any indication what that update of that 5-year plan may look like?
If it's anything like the stuff he's been talking about in these all-staff memos, it's going to be, I think, similar to that path, which is really trying to focus on the core business, really trying to get back to profitability. That has been the repeated goal. I think that's easier said than done. This is a business that is, even if they manage to make the right cuts, they're going to be suffering from, I think, employee morale. This has been a really hard few months for Wework employees who felt in June or July that they were on the brink of a really successful IPO, and now the company seems to have gone through a 180. I think many people, even if they aren't getting cut this week, are choosing to leave. I've heard Wework employees tell me that a lot of people don't show up for work. People are openly taking interviews elsewhere. Of course, there are many people who feel devoted to the company and want to stay, but others who feel like it's on shaky ground want to find a way out.
And from your reporting, do you get a sense that the 16% or the couple thousand that we think could start to be getting laid off this week, is that within Wework, the office sharing business specifically, or does that also include some of those other side businesses that you were talking about?
It's probably going to include side businesses. I think that total number is going to be up to a little massaging. There are going to be some companies or side companies within Wework that are probably expected to shut down, and most of those employees will leave. It also gets a little complicated. For example, many of the cleaners at Wework were in-house employees for many years. These were called community service associates and other titles such as that. And those workers were in-house for many years. Now it seems like as of this week or next week, they're going to be slowly transitioning to being hired by an outside contractor who will then provide the services back in. So there's some job shifting going around, so that final number of layoffs may be a little hard to pin down.
It was interesting that you mentioned the CEO in that all hands-on letter, because there's been some rumors circulating about a new CEO, John Legere, who we learned today will be stepping down from T-Mobile in May of 2020. His name was being thrown in the mix. Why the CEO shakeup after they had just ousted Adam Neumann?
So they have these two co-CEOs, Artie Minson and Sebastian Gunningham, who stepped in after Adam Neumann left. But even though the company has said that they weren't initially going to start on a search, it seems like SoftBank, and or maybe the company as well are starting to ask around, try to see if there's someone who can take over the job. I think they recognize it'll probably be important to have someone step in with a lot of confidence and ability to sort of set a new course for leadership. It's just been so shaky internally since then, and they've had Marcelo step in as executive chairman, but notably not in a CEO role, and I think the expectation would be that he would work alongside with whoever ends up becoming CEO. I'm sure that this is a search that weighs heavily on the minds of the board and executives at Wework, trying to find the right person who might be able to lead them out of this tumultuous period.
Well, and like you said, boosting employee morale can be so key to that strategy. Thank you. That was Bloomberg Technology's Ellen Hewitt. Now, when Alphabet started looking into acquiring Fitbit, it turned to a familiar name, the same entity it took when it took over Motorola in 2011. That was Lazard. It's the investment bank whose beginnings date back to the 1800s. And while the share of deal advisory work for Lazard is ranked at the lowest in almost 2 decades, it can count on the Silicon Valley giant as a surprising and steady source of business. Joining us to discuss it is Bloomberg's Leanna Baker. So, Leanna, I have to ask, why the Google-Lazard partnership?
It actually started back to about a decade ago when one of Lazard's most famous connectors, Vernon Jordan, he's known as being a confidant to Bill Clinton and the ultimate DC insider, he had a relationship with Google's top lawyer, David Drummond. They made the connection, and it's been history ever since. Google has been advised by Lazard on over $22 billion worth of deals since 2011. They've quietly become Google's house bank.
Well, and we recently, of course, knew that they had acquired Fitbit. What are some of the other deals that we know that they've been an advisor on?
Lazard has stepped in to advise Google on its most transformative deals, whether it's Nest a few years ago, or it started with Motorola, which was almost a $10 billion deal in 2011. But they've also been on Looker Technologies, a deal earlier this year that we're still waiting for approval from DC on. And they've also done smaller deals because Lazard is on retainer with Google, so they don't just advise on the largest transactions. They're paid a retainer fee, about $200,000 a month, and they'll weigh in on anything that Google's looking at. In 2016, they did advise Google when they looked at Twitter. So not every deal that Lazard works on ends up coming to fruition.
Any sense of how all of those fees that you just pointed out stack up into Lazard's broader business strategy?
We've reported that, according to consultants, Lazard has only made about $70 million estimated fees from Google. So that's not make or break for Lazard. It won't make their year. But it's this sort of repeat business and investment banking that the boutique has come to rely on. Lazard has been in a bit of a shakeup. One of their top bankers left in France just a few weeks ago. And as you mentioned before, their market share of deal making isn't what it used to be. Lazard has a ton of boutique rivals that have taken a big share, even in Silicon Valley. Look at Evercore or Centerview or PJT Partners. So while Lazard is almost 180 years old, they now have competition in this independent advisory space.
Well, and Leanna, within that competitive landscape that you just highlighted, how dependent has Lazard become more and more on those Silicon Valley giants, on those repetitive clients that they do have that seemingly permanent relationship with?
Lazard has a couple of tech clients that are big names like IBM, but working with Google, some rivals of Lazard have told me that maybe they're conflicted out of working with other tech giants. So by working with Google on every deal, they may not necessarily be able to work with, let's say, Apple or Facebook. So they definitely are kind of planting a flag on this relationship, and they're really committed, and that's what Google likes. They like the secrecy, they like how Lazard is behind the scenes, and until now, they haven't really been in the headlines connected to Google.
Bloomberg's Leanna Baker, thank you for joining us. Now, the state of California has sued Juul for allegedly marketing its e-cigarettes to teenagers. Authorities say that the company sought out vulnerable targets for its product. Juul has become a target of government regulators trying to stop an epidemic of new, young nicotine users. And coming up, waiting in the lobby, Facebook and Google are spending big to keep regulators at bay. We break down their Washington tactics next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. Now to a story that we're following, the continued pursuit of big tech by the U.S. government. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri has introduced a new bill aimed at protecting Americans' data from being acquired by countries deemed to be a national security threat. The bill would target companies like the popular viral video app TikTok, which is owned by China's ByteDance. For example, the bill says TikTok couldn't collect user data deemed unnecessary to its business and transmit it to operations inside China. Joining us to discuss from Washington, it is Bloomberg's Ben Brody, who covers the tech lobbying, and in studio, our own Kurt Wagner. Ben, let me just start with you. What are your thoughts on this bill?
Well, I think that what it represents is lawmakers increasingly feeling that they have to grapple with the notion of China's international tech ambitions and the possibility that they could really be setting the rules for the web, not just in China for their 1 billion plus people, but here in the United States. You know, do they set the content rules on TikTok? Do they set the surveillance rules on their various apps and platforms? So I think this is a response by Hawley, and of course he had that hearing a week or two ago where he was very angry at TikTok and Apple for not showing up. So I think this is their response, and you're seeing this sort of question go throughout the government right now.
And Kurt, is this the kind of protection that big tech wants, that consumers want?
Probably to some extent, yeah. We've seen Facebook in particular, but also Google and others kind of push for regulation. And what they really mean is that they want to be involved in shaping regulation. So if they can have some type of guidelines or rules that are written down where they can really just follow those to a T, and that kind of solves all of their issues, that looks good for them, especially if it keeps, you know, potential upstarts or startups from catching up. They have such a strong advantage. So, you know, in this case, TikTok is obviously a threat, I think, to Facebook. And so if there are certain regulations that, you know, they might hurt Facebook a little bit, but if they really hurt a foreign competitor like TikTok, they might be on board with something like that.
And Ben, thankfully we have you on a day when there just continues to be more and more proposed legislation coming out. Today we got another headline that the FTC is saying that they are looking at multiple tech antitrust probes that are underway, and that they are going to review all of these antitrust laws in the wake of all of these new big tech probes. Does this indicate that the size and scope is bigger than what we thought before?
I think absolutely. We know that both the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Justice Department are doing these sort of wide-ranging probes into digital marketplaces, and they all sort of look like they're all doing Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple. Now, we know that DOJ is formally looking into both Google and Facebook. We know that FTC is formally looking into Facebook. Facebook is subject to both of them right now. What we don't know is whether they are doing those other companies. And I think Chairman Simons raised the question today that they may be doing all four of those, or at least two or three. And if I were an investor in that company, I'd definitely be looking at the question of how intense that scrutiny has gotten.
And Kurt, does this meet the level of barrier or the bar that needs to be set in terms of does it harm competition when you look at all four of the big tech companies that potentially now could be in play?
I mean, that's the ultimate question, is that, and Facebook, again, has talked about this the most, primarily because we know about those investigations and they've talked a little bit more openly about it. But their argument has basically been none of the accusations are really about harming consumers, right? We are being penalized because we're big, and that is our only crime. And so that will be a question that we'll start exploring, I'm sure, as these investigations move forward in the targeted advertising field, when you have Facebook and Google and Amazon is starting to get into that. When you talk about app stores, right, with Google and Apple having these really dominant app stores. So it's tough to say if anyone is being harmed or who's being harmed in what way, but those are the ultimate questions that we're going to be looking at.
You know, Ben, I was looking at another story about Google and Facebook donating now to privacy groups and think tanks, and this sort of extends their reach beyond just traditional lobbyists, in which, you know, lobbying, we understand that's sort of a normal course of business. How much does it concern you now that you see big donations from Facebook and Google and the likes really to these privacy advocacy groups, to all of these think tanks that in some ways appear to be neutral?
I think that's exactly the point. This is not traditional lobbying. This is about shaping the narrative. This is about shaping the conversation somewhat as it goes out to the public, but also just as it sort of appears to the Washington class here among reporters, among staff, among lawmakers. And it's always a concern when you're going to an event, when you're going to a talk, how balanced is this? Who is presenting? What biases do they have? Do we know their biases? What's disclosed about it? It's absolutely a part of how I think everybody here in Washington is weighing this policy-making process. And I think that these groups will often push back and say, we have lots of different corporate donations and lots of different sponsorships, and we put forth the best solutions that we think we can. Some groups are more forthright and even-handed about it, and some groups are largely captured by these companies and essentially putting forth their agendas in shadow lobbying.
And Kurt, when you were looking through some of these think tanks, companies that we know of, Cato Institute, Access Now, Center for Democracy and Technology, what stood out to you the most in terms of the size of the donation and if it really is influencing them?
Well, what stood out is that it's hard to exactly say, because some of these were hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some of these I think were as low as $10,000 donation. What does that really buy you, right? And I think when it comes down to it, this is a play about leverage. This is a play about relationships, as with all of these kinds of donations in DC. You want to have be able to pick up the phone and probably make a call to someone. You want to be able to get your point of view across. And when you have that existing relationship, it's probably easier to do that. So it's a little bit tough to say exactly how much, the dollar amount you could almost set aside, right? This is about building a relationship with people who have the ear of the media and the general public, and I think that's what these companies are trying to do.
Another day, another big tech in focus here on Bloomberg Technology. Thank you both to Bloomberg's Kurt Wagner and Ben Brody. And coming up, we talk investing in enterprise startups with Boldstart Ventures partner. He's Ed Sim. He's at the firm as the firm announces a $157 million in funding next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Just 8 years ago, New York-based venture firm Boldstart Ventures raised $1.5 million fund. Now, it raised $157 million across 2 new funds, both to back enterprise software startups. The news comes just days after SoftBank announced its funding, $2 billion funding for its second Vision Fund, also focusing closely on enterprise startups. For more on the latest funding, we're joined by Boldstart Ventures partner Ed Sim. Ed, great to have you, and talk to me. As you take a look at the landscape with these 2 new funds, fresh capital, where do you see the best opportunities in which to invest?
For us, it's always been about the digital transformation of the Fortune 500. If you think about the world as every Fortune 500 is a software company, they're hiring lots of engineers. So we think that whole move to cloud computing, to a developer-first kind of atmosphere, is an awesome opportunity to invest. And I think secondly, if you think about it, Salesforce is over 20 years old, and tech changes so rapidly. So the opportunity to reinvent and rebuild parts of Salesforce with the new stack of technologies is super impressive. So companies like Customer with a K in our portfolio are going after Zendesk and Service Cloud in a pretty aggressive way, and we're excited about that.
Well, and I like that within your 2 funds, it sort of focuses on different companies. One is an early seed and one is an opportunities fund, which is transforming sort of existing companies that are already in play. Between those 2, what has been harder to raise money for?
It's interesting. It was definitely the early stage portion. This is kind of our first institutional fund, and it took us a while to prove out in 2010 when we started with a vision of being the first investor in for technical enterprise founders. And I think with the success of a lot of our portfolio companies who've gone on to raise over $100 million since we helped get them off the ground, companies like Sneak and Big ID and Security Scorecard, that eventually the institutional investors paid attention. On the Opportunity Fund, it was much easier because we could point to those success stories and point to opportunities to invest in them in future rounds, and they had real metrics versus the prior fund was more about a vision.
What question are these institutional investors asking you the most when they hand over their capital?
They're asking always about kind of how do you actually frame and think about investing in two people and an idea. And we're trying to help them understand that for us, it's about founder market fit. It's about reimagining kind of things that already exist or creating new categories and walking them through the framework of how we think about the product perspective along with what large enterprises may buy.
Ed, I asked this question to a lot of the guests that I interview, and I have yet to get a solid answer. I'm hoping you will give this to me today, and that is, on what year, on average, let's say, do you want to see profitability from these companies?
I have to tell you the truth. So when we invest in companies, we're only investing in enterprise software companies. So from a gross margin perspective, we really don't have to think about what that may be because it's high gross margins. From a profitability perspective, we don't invest to think when this may be profitable. We need to make sure that the total addressable market, or TAM, is potentially massive, and that the founders in the very beginning can execute on product. They need to focus on building the best product, to finding the first user, and then finding dozens and dozens of users after that. So if you focus on that first in the very beginning, and you have a great product, then you'll be able to win customers.
SoftBank recently was looking at raising their second vision fund, and they too are going to closely look at enterprise software. How overvalued is this space now with so much cash chasing too few opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's a interesting and leading question. I frankly think that there are some companies that are overvalued, but to be honest with you, I think we're just still in the second inning. I mean, if you look at the cloud computing space as a percentage of overall IT infrastructure spend, I think it's about 10%. So if you take that number and look at kind of the next 5 or 10 years, I think no matter what economic cycle that we're in, there's going to be lots of opportunities for enterprises to buy new technology. So what you think that the value may be today, I still think 3 or 4 years from now, I think all of us will be in pretty good shape.
And how much is SoftBank a threat given to seeing how overvalued companies like Wework became? Do you fear that that comes into your area as well?
Well, look, I mean, there's always a risk of, I've been in this business for over 20 years, and there's always a risk of companies being overcapitalized. And in fact, I was on your show in August talking about money is not the answer to winning. You still have to build a really solid business. You've got to have balanced growth versus growth at all costs. And I think kind of the Weworks and the consumer type companies, you won't see that in the enterprise space. I think most enterprise founders are a little more practical, and it's really hard just to turn on the spigot and spend money and grow because there's a lag time to actually selling into these large enterprises.
Boldstart Ventures partner Ed Sim, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
And coming up, Apple's latest iPhone is scoring early success in its second largest market, China. Why shipment growth is up despite trade tensions between the two countries. That is next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology Global Link, where we join Bloomberg Daybreak Australia to bring you the latest in global tech news. I'm Taylor Riggs in San Francisco with Paul Allen in Sydney and Kathleen Hayes in New York. Let's take a look at those top global tech stories of the day. Paul.
All right, thanks very much, Taylor.
Yeah, so I'm going to start here with SoftBank. They're going to create a Japanese internet giant to battle rivals like Google and Amazon. Masayoshi Son plans to combine SoftBank's Yahoo Japan internet business with messaging service Line. That will become a joint venture in a deal that will not close until next October. The companies say the combination is driven by a sense of crisis. The global giants are increasing their hold on the tech industry. And T-Mobile CEO John Legere is stepping down. The self-appointed industry rebel will leave April 30th at the end of his current contract. Legere will stay on the board. The move is a long-planned transition. The new T-Mobile chief executive will be president and chief operating officer Mike Sievert. He has been the brains behind many of T-Mobile's popular initiatives. And the board of HP has unanimously rejected a takeover offer from Xerox. The company said the bid is too low, plus it raised questions about Xerox's prospects in the printing industry. HP says it is open to exploring a merger, but it says there are fundamental questions that need to be answered. And those are a look at today's top global tech stories. And now Chinese consumers are rediscovering their appetite for iPhones. Bloomberg crunched the numbers and found that Apple shipped 10 million iPhones in China during both September and October. And that was a 6% increase from a year earlier. And that confirms that the iPhone 11 is selling more strongly than its predecessor. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg Technology's Mark Gurman, who covers Apple for us. Mark, what is driving the demand? The phones don't even have 5G.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that this is an upgrade cycle, people coming from the iPhone 10. Remember last year, the iPhone XS and XS Max and XR were considerably, not big upgrades, or they were too expensive. In the case of the XR, prices of the XS Max were very high with very little additional new features. Now we're in a year where there was a more significant update, even with the lack of 5G. So it would make sense that in a year where the feature set improvements were very minimal, be a down year compared to a year like this year where the feature set improvements were more significant.
So Mark, they did cut the price a bit. Looks like they worked on the battery life. They've updated their camera. Give us some more details on that, how important it is, and what it means for what they have to do in the future.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, exactly. They upgraded the camera. There's now a triple lens system on the back, which means you can take now wide-angle photos. So if you take a picture, instead of it being at 1x or 2x, you can take it at 0.5x, which basically means you get much more content in the frame. People are really liking the battery life. Apple's quoting between 4 and 5 hours additional battery life, depending on the model you have. That new midnight green color is pretty popular. The enhanced video recording capabilities on the phone as well. And so these are ways that Apple is spurring upgrades. You see the commercials about them, and they're making money in other ways too, with the new AirPods, new Apple Watch, and it all fits into that larger iPhone ecosystem.
Mark, I was surprised that there wasn't a sense of nationalism, that given the trade fight between the U.S. and China, that they weren't going out and buying Huawei phones, sort of retaliate against the U.S. Does this confirm that there isn't a big sense of nationalism there, at least when it comes to phones?
I mean, more generally in China, right, the iPhone is not doing as well as it used to do, right? We have not had large, gigantic iPhone sales that like we used to have in a number of years. I mean, if you remember, 2014 through 2016 was really the peak of the iPhone in China. And this trade war, in part, threw things for a wrench. But I think the bigger issue, to your point, that Apple is having is that for consumers in China, in many cases, offerings from Xiaomi and Huawei are much more capable. They have better specs. They integrate better with the Chinese consumers. And so, I mean, that is the fundamental issue, I think, not necessarily the trade war.
Well, Mark, a quick question. What do they have to do then? I mean, I think they're lucky this year that Xiaomi and Huawei are not luring so many Chinese consumers away. But again, when you look to the next year and the next year, what does Apple have to do to compete?
What I think Apple really needs to do is they need to come up with a batch of services and features that are very specific to the Chinese market. But I think what some people don't understand, unless you've been to China or live in China, is that it is a completely different world in terms of the services used there, in terms of the mobile payments infrastructure. And the iPhone is very much an American device, a European device. But when you go to China, you're competing with WeChat and Waymo and all that functionality they have there. So Apple really needs to either better integrate with those services, have them really more baked into the software, iOS, or they need to come up to real competitors with WeChat and such to really, strong arm the Chinese market.
Mark, where does Apple forecast their % of total market share in China in the next coming years relative to a Huawei or a Xiaomi?
where do they forecast how they're going to be in the Chinese market? I mean, they don't give forecasts on specific markets, and they don't report or forecast iPhone unit sales or unit sales for any product like that, right? They've just been talking about their overall forecast for revenue, which would be a few percent increase for the holiday quarter. But in terms of the Chinese market, I think it'll be stable. I think you'll probably see another, between 5 and 10% year-over-year increase from this Q1 to Q1, very similar to what we saw from Q4 to Q4 with the September to October 6% increase numbers you quoted. So I think it'll just be more of the same, which is a good thing, because overall, the overall market, the iPhone actually fell 9% year over year in the previous quarter.
Bloomberg Technology's Mark Gurman, thank you for joining us. And we'll have a lot more when we come back. This is Bloomberg. The public is still waiting for driverless vehicles to truly hit the road, but the CEO of Waymo thinks there is one part of the market that will get rolling first. Last month, the CEO told reporters that before we see things like true robo-taxis, it's most likely to be driverless trucks, like those that Waymo has been testing out on public roads in California and the southwestern United States. Joining us to discuss from the Techonomy Conference in Half Moon Bay, California, it is Waymo's Chief Product Officer, Dan Chu. Dan, great to have you there. Talk to me a little bit about that. Could we really see driverless trucks before some of these robo-taxis?
I do think we're very excited about the long-haul trucking opportunity, as there's a lot of demand for it as in a large industry. It's really a foundation for the economy. So we're definitely interested in it. In fact, we've been working on this since 2017, and we've already done a pilot with Google, shipping some of their data center parts in Atlanta.
How has the general rollout been going in cities like Phoenix, where you're looking at robo-taxis and true driverless vehicles?
The rollout has been going really well. I'm really excited about our progress. So we started in 2017, launching an early rider program where we had over 20,000 people sign up in just a matter of days. Nowadays, we have thousands of riders that are taking rides. And most importantly, over the last few months, we've actually been rolling out fully driverless rides. So now we have riders in our rider programs in Phoenix who can go ahead and hail a ride with a mobile app and have a car show up that has no driver in it at all and go ahead and take various trips with it.
When would we see a bigger rollout, perhaps nationwide, instead of just in select cities of that program?
So we definitely have global ambitions. Our mission is really to make every single mile safer. So we definitely want to get everywhere as soon as we can. But we do think the rollout will be city by city. It'll be incremental. So we will continue to expand as we are in Metro Phoenix and go beyond from there. We've already driven in over 25 cities. We've been testing in new ones as well. So for instance, recently we started testing in Miami. We've also started testing in Los Angeles.
Have you ridden in one? What is it like?
Oh yes, I definitely have. It's an important part of our culture at Waymo for us to actually be what we call dog fooding or trying our own product. It's an incredible experience. We really think it brings that bit of independence, that privacy, that time to yourself. We really do believe it's a whole new product.
How quickly or how much have concerns over safety forced you to perhaps slow down your expansion plans, where safety over just getting there first is more of a priority?
Well, I think we've always had an approach of launching this incrementally. We think that's the most safe and responsible way of getting the technology out. So if you look at the history of our project, we've had the first self-driving ride, or fully driverless ride in Austin. Then we had a fleet of vehicles in 2017, and then our Waymo 1 launch at the end of last year. So we've taken it incrementally, and I think we've been doing that steady approach for a while.
When could we expect to see driverless delivery?
Yeah, so we definitely are excited about a whole number of applications of what we call the world's most experienced driver, really focused on the technology and core technology. So as we've talked about, we have ride hailing, long-haul trucking in our conversation here, and then delivery as well. And we're also interested in personally owned cars because many of our OEM partners are interested in that as well. So I think we'll be rolling those out over the course of the next few years.
You know, the technology behind this has been difficult, I think, to get up to this point. There's been a few setbacks along the way. Why do you think this really is the best use of your brain power, of your technology?
I'm really convinced around the social impact and the benefits that self-driving technology will have. We look at road safety, that is really core to the mission of Waymo. Over 1.35 million lives are lost on the roads every single year on a global basis. That's one of the leading causes of death. And even in the United States, that number has been going up. Over the last 5 years, that number has actually increased, gone the wrong way. And so I think for those reasons, road safety and some of the other benefits that it might have on the environment and space usage, it's definitely the right focus for our attention.
Except that within this societal impact, what do you say to people who say you're taking away jobs from taxi drivers, from people who drive ride-hailing companies like Lyft or Uber today?
It's definitely an important question as things change. There will be changes there as well. We want to be part of the solution. So one of the things here is that this change will be incremental. It'll take time to roll out. The second is that we want to be part of creating jobs. So right now in Phoenix, we're already seeing some of that happening. We're creating a whole new categories of jobs that never existed before, such as a LiDAR technician or an EV technician. Lastly, I think the other thing that often isn't discussed in that conversation is around how mobility is an important part of employment. That giving people access to jobs is how they're going to be able to get those jobs. We know that in the United States, over 20 to 30 million Americans, adult Americans, aren't able to get driver's licenses for any number of reasons. So between creation of jobs and about giving access, those are some of the ways that we hope to be a part of the solution.
Waymo's Dan Chu, thank you for joining us. Now, also attending the Techonomy Conference in Half Moon Bay, it's veteran of the advertising industry and founder of WPP, Sir Martin Sorrell. I spoke with him a little bit earlier to get his views on political ads run by tech companies. Take a listen.
The media, any medium, is responsible for the content that flows through their pipes or on their pages or on their screens. So I think the basic question is whether tech companies are media companies in this particular area and a number of other areas, or whether they are media companies. So that's the big question. I remember I did an interview at Cannes, the advertising festival, about 10 years ago. I had 4 tech companies on, including Google and Facebook and Microsoft and whatever. And the first question I asked them was, are you tech companies or media companies? And they all said they were tech companies. Well, we know they are responsible for their content. And to be fair, those platforms, particularly Google and Facebook, have moved their model. Google has hired 10,000 people, Facebook has hired 30,000 people to monitor their content. So my view is political advertising, yes, as long as you monitor the content and make sure that it is statistically correct. And that it's not fake news and it's not misleading. Just by the way, just like you would see in the UK, that the content is monitored for inaccuracy, to put it politely.
So Facebook is wrong in that they're choosing to run political ads, but not fact-checking them on their platform.
Well, my view is that you're responsible for the content. Ultimately, you're responsible for the content. As I said at the Techonomy Conference just a few minutes ago, you can't claim you're sort of digital engineers just tightening the nuts on the digital pipes and not responsible for the information that flows through those pipes. I think you have to take responsibility for that. And to be fair, I think the platforms, I mean, your zeroing in one particular area, political advertising on Facebook. To be fair, Facebook as a platform, and you see it in their results, their margins and their costs have been affected by the fact that they've taken on a large number of people to monitor the content in a more responsible way. So they have moved the needle quite significantly towards responsibility. If one end of the spectrum is responsible and the other is irresponsible, they've moved the needle by acknowledging that they have to monitor the content.
Should they be under CFIUS review, ByteDance?
Well, you're getting it. You know, the question is, are these companies an extension of the Chinese state or not? You know, obviously, questions are raised in the context of a Huawei and its connection to the PLA or not. You know, they're steadfast in saying that they're a company that are disassociated from the government and disassociated from the PLA. No, so do I think it should be subject to CFIUS review? Probably not, because I don't think they are the sort of threat that people think they are. But, you know, there are people who believe that. But, you know, that's the CFIUS question is not a question about ByteDance or Huawei. It's a question about whether we in the West are prepared to accept the rise of China.
That was S4 Capital Chairman Sir Martin Sorrell. And still ahead, Ford is entering the electric vehicle market with confidence as it introduces new battery-powered Mustang SUV to challenge Tesla. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Let's take a look at today's top tech calls. Shares of Lyft rose on Monday after Get's rideshare business Juno closed its New York business and partnered with Lyft for U.S. corporate clients. An analyst at JMP Securities said there was a clearer path to profitability. The analyst is incrementally positive on Lyft shares, giving continued momentum in ride sharing and a clearer path to that profitability. And Salesforce analysts continue to grow optimistic about the company's investor day on Wednesday, with several firms anticipating an update to targets by the enterprise software company. Jefferies reiterated a buy and raised the price target to $195 a share, saying it expects management to balance revenue growth and margin improvement. And T-Mobile CEO John Legere is announcing plans to step down as CEO in May of 2020, and it removes uncertainty and is not a big surprise. That's according to analysts at Wells Fargo. He believes that the CEO successor has taken a very public role with the street and has a strong track record in the wireless space. And those were a look at the top tech calls. Now, Ford is reinventing one of its marquee models, the Mustang muscle car, as a battery-powered crossover to compete in the electric vehicle market. In a ceremony Sunday ahead of the Los Angeles Auto Show, the car maker unveiled the Mustang Mach-E. Ford CEO Jim Hackett is confident in its profitability.
And so we've got a price point with the Mach-E base package that's in the mid-30,000 with the incentive, with the federal incentive here in the United States. And so it's going to be attractive to customers. It's going to make a contribution margin. It's a great story.
Now, Ford Automotive President Joe Hinrichs sat down with Bloomberg's David Weston to discuss whether Ford has been late to embrace electric cars.
We've been taking our time to make sure when we thought the time was right, and we're leaning into our iconic nameplates. We're going to have a battery electric F-150, like we've talked about recently, and of course the Mustang extension of the brand here. We wanted to get the costs right. We wanted to wait for the customers were right, and get actually the charging network right. We're part of the largest charging network in America, over 12,000 locations. So want to get all that right, and this is going to be contribution margin positive. We're going to make money selling this vehicle. We think that's important too.
Where are you going to make them?
We're going to make them in Mexico, largely because a big portion of the volume is going to Europe. It's a big important part of our plan for Europe as well, and we can ship from Mexico to Europe duty-free. But also we had available plant in Mexico because we stopped building the Fiesta sedan for the North American market as we've right-sized our portfolio, and then that plant could be converted over just to make battery electric vehicles.
We're talking with Joe Hinrichs, who is the president of automotive for Ford Motor Company. You talked about Europe. How much will be sold in the United States, and how much in China also, because China has a big push on for electric vehicles?
No question that China is a big market for battery electric vehicles. Well, first here, we're going to build it here and ship it to Europe, and about the volume will be roughly half between the two markets as we start to grow the business. And we'll explore the opportunity of selling the vehicle and building the vehicle in China at a later date.
Tell us how this fits into the overall restructuring of the company that has been going on. We've heard about about the $11 billion you're investing, some basic changes you're making in Europe as well as the United States. How does this fit into that plan?
Well, we've announced over $11 billion commitment to electrification. We have 40 products in development right now that have some form of electrification, battery electrics, plug-in hybrids, and hybrids. A number of our new vehicles we've launched recently, for example, the Explorer and the Escape, have hybrid versions. Actually, the Escape's going to have a plug-in hybrid version next year. So you're seeing that electrification be part of the portfolio. Of course, we'll keep having internal combustion engine vehicles as well. So we're rolling these out over the next several years. It's a big part of our portfolio expansion. But what's in the background here, what you're seeing is a movement away in North America from our sedans, historical sedans, many more SUV and truck offerings, but with electrification as a portfolio option, a propulsion option in that portfolio.
So you're the car guy. You know how to make cars on the plant floor. One of the things I've read is that with electric vehicles, you need fewer workers per vehicle. Is that true? Give us some sort of rough comparison.
It is true. So the final area, which is the final line, so you have the body shop and the paint shop, they're roughly the same. The final area, which is where most of the labor is, and all the floor space, about half the floor space requirements, about 30% less labor to build a battery electric vehicle compared to internal combustion engine, largely because of all that wiring, all the connections, all the fluids that go with the internal combustion engine. So you really want to, if you can, you want to build the vehicle in its own plant so you can take advantage of that footprint size. Because if you build the vehicle alongside internal combustion engine vehicles, you don't get the benefit of taking care of all that floor space and freeing it up. What it does allow us to do is bring in motor assembly, for example, which are a very important part of electric vehicles, and do that in the plant as opposed to somewhere else, and really use that space efficiently.
How big is the market potentially for electric vehicles, such as the Mustang, the Mach-E? I mean, because right now, although there's a lot of talk about electric vehicles, it's actually a very small portion of the fleet.
It's about 3% of the sales are electrified in total in the U.S. last year, but we think that's really going to grow over the next 5 to 10 years, especially with all the products being offered in the next 5 years. So we think the timing's right for us. You know, we're going to continue to offer many different options for our customers, but we believe by the end of the next decade, by the end of about 2030 time frame, at least half of our vehicles will have some form of electrification that are being sold to the marketplace.
That was Ford Automotive President Joe Hinrichs. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology, and Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.